We are back, and we are joined once again by Zachary Foster, historian of Palestine, received his PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. His newsletter, Palestine Nexus, is an essential follow. You archive so much Palestinian history, which is as important as ever right now, as Israel has destroyed basically every educational institution in Gaza. Zach, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me back.
For sure. So I guess we'll start here from the beginning of the week, where Benjamin Netanyahu visited the United States, met with Trump, and during their media appearances, Trump endorsed the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. Can you just give us a quick rundown of the developments from the past few days?
Well, we've all seen the press conference in which Donald Trump incited ethnic cleansing. He called for the complete removal of all Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. Before the war, that was 2.2, 2.3 million people. He threw out a figure of 1.5 million, 1.7 million, 1.8 million. It's unclear if he meant that, if he was implying the remaining Palestinians had already been killed, or if they had already left. It's unclear. We have no idea how many people are in Gaza now. But
but can I just say, to add to that really quickly, people are saying, oh, you believe him now or whatever. It's not about believing him. It's that he's dumb enough to accidentally let slip what could actually be the internal numbers that they are estimating about the death toll, which, given that deficit, it would indicate 500,000. And we know that it's up well over, I would say, 100,000 at this point. It's somewhere between those two figures. That's my theory on that front.
Was it already last summer? We had a group of American physicians, some 99 American healthcare workers, report out about 118,000, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
We had the Lancet estimate of 180,000. The answer is we just have no idea how many people are killed because we don't have heavy equipment in Gaza. You can't actually dig people out of the rubble. And even if you could, so many bodies have been completely vaporized, have completely incinerated into ash. And so it's just totally unclear how many people have been killed. Could it be upwards of 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 people? Yes, it could be. That is exactly what experts have been telling us for already over a year now. So it's incredibly dire, the situation in Gaza. We had reports coming out. The Human Rights Watch reported just this week that that humanitarian aid is not getting into Gaza. We know that trucks are entering Gaza, but they're not actually entering the north. And much of what is entering Gaza is actually not essential equipment. The hospitals have not been replenished. There's no MRI machines going in. There's 80+% of the wells in Gaza have been destroyed. None of the equipment to repair any of the wells has entered Gaza. So the humanitarian effort is slow, and it's not meeting the needs of the population. And so, right now we have a situation in which the sitting U.S. president is declaring his intent to carry out war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, on public TV. It's totally unreal. It's almost unprecedented. At least the Biden administration attempted to hide its attempts to ethnically cleanse Gaza. You recall that in the early month or two after October 7th, Blinken made his trip to Tel Aviv, and he discussed for hours and hours begging the Netanyahu administration to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. But the Biden administration was totally on board with ethnic cleansing. Blinken made a trip around the Middle East, trying to convince Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, president of Egypt, to accept refugees. He tried to convince Jordan to accept Palestinian refugees. They all said no way, and they've all said no way again. Not just Egypt. Not just Jordan, which declared recently this past week that they would declare war against Israel if this plan to ethnically cleanse Palestinians was executed on. And then you saw the comments made by Saudi Arabia just in the past day or two, in which the Saudi Arabian foreign minister, wearing a keffiyeh, said, absolutely not. There's no way we're going to allow this to happen. There's no way we're going to agree to normalize with Israel unless there's a Palestinian state, something Trump lied about. He just openly stated what was a bold-faced lie, that Saudi Arabia had, in fact, agreed to some kind of normalization deal with Israel without the establishment of a Palestinian state. So Trump is totally deranged. He's unpredictable. It's unclear exactly where these comments came from. It seemed almost that Netanyahu was almost surprised by this proposition.
Pleasantly surprised.
Pleasantly surprised. Just that smirk on his face during the press conference where he's smiling, where he's smirking, while Trump is openly declaring that Gaza will become, I don't know, some U.S. territory, annexed into the United States. I mean, it's just totally deranged.
Yeah. Seeing him smirk like that, the thoughts that were going through my brain, I'm not going to articulate it, but some vivid imagery I had. So the Jordan and Saudi Arabia, can you talk about the sincerity of their opposition? My concern is that in particular Saudi Arabia, because they don't have, they're worried about, yes, riots in the streets, but there's still no democracy there and direct way to hold MBS and that government accountable. Are you concerned that their public opposition is more window dressing than what the conversations look like behind the scenes?
There's no doubt that is correct. On the eve of October 7th, there were very, very serious, very, very high-level discussions between senior Saudi officials and U.S. officials and Israeli officials with regard to a normalization plan. There were even rumors that this had already effectively been agreed on, and there were just some details to iron out. That was October 6th, 2023. So there's no doubt, and that was coming on the heels of a 17-year-long blockade of the Gaza Strip, in which Israel suffocated the civilian population, imposing collective punishment on 2.2 million people. After 4 wars in which Israel killed 4,000 plus innocent Palestinian civilians, 1,000 plus in 2008-9, 1,500 plus in 2014, many hundred in 2012, many hundred in 2021, many hundred in 2018-19. So the Saudi government has no regard for Palestinian human life, Palestinian civilian loss of life in the occupied Palestinian territories. Recall as well that it was Mohammed bin Salman who openly, I think, confessed it was a leaked report, but he basically said, I don't really care much about the Palestinians. I mean, this has been known for a long time now. Mohammed bin Salman carried out a 5, 6, 7-year-long war on Yemen, killing tens of thousands of Yemenis children. MBS has no regard whatsoever for innocent loss of life at all. He butchered Jamal Khashoggi in the infamous murder of a Washington Post journalist in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul a couple of years ago. This is a person who has no regard for innocent life, for journalists, for humanitarian workers, for Palestinian civilians in Gaza. He is obsessed with kind of a 2030 vision in which Saudi Arabia is gonna remake the Middle East. His plan is to build a city called Neom on the Red Sea coast, in which American entrepreneurs, businessmen around the world will create this kind of enclave, this almost a kind of like a little city in the desert, a westernized city where men and women will intermingle. But ultimately, that's his vision for the Middle East. It's a kind of almost a techno-utopia. But it has nothing to do with human rights. It has nothing to do with women's rights. It has nothing to do with Palestinian rights. It's fundamentally about building a kind of a techno-utopia to transition off the Saudi economy from oil to something else. But that's his vision. It has nothing to do with Palestinians.
That fits in extremely well with the tech billionaires, like anarcho-capitalist vision, whether it's Praxis and these other privatized cities that Andreessen and Musk and Peter Thiel are investing in. That's like Abu Dhabi. I mean, it's different, but like that's also the vision, right? More of that, more to increase tourism and not be so reliant on oil. And then if it's a tech utopia, that means surveillance and weapons technology. Then, right? Like that's the vision, is a hub of tech billionaires or tech billions, but then the surveillance and weapons technology that comes from it.
It's well known that Israel's military tech, its spy tech, is some of the most cutting edge military tech and spy tech in the world. I mean, we all know what Pegasus is capable of. They can tap any phone in the world without having the owner of that phone touch anything, tap anything, click anything. It is total surveillance. And the Saudis are already using that tech. We know that. Khashoggi's, I believe, his fiancée had her phone tapped and was being monitored by Pegasus, an Israeli spy tech firm. So we know what the goals of this Saudi administration are. They are to clamp down on any dissent whatsoever within the kingdom. They are to clamp down even on dissent from outside of the kingdom, as you saw with the Khashoggi assassination. They are to strengthen the alliance with Israel, to create a new Middle East, one in which Israel is supreme, one in which the Palestinians are completely irrelevant. But as we saw, because Trump's comments are so blatant, so overt, so with total disregard for the norms of saying things, of doing the quiet part quietly, he's blowing things up. He's actually really messing things up for Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia, like we said, isn't fundamentally interested in a Palestinian state. They don't really care about that. And Trump's just overt disregard for international humanitarian law, his open promotion of ethnic cleansing, is throwing a wrench in the Saudi plan for the future of the Middle East.
Because he's being too clear about it, right? And to be clear, the Biden administration, with some of the same folks that stayed on, like Brett McGurk, was pursuing the Abraham Accords and normalization with Saudi Arabia, which include potentially defense promises. Let's be like, you think we're entangled in Israel? Wait till the U.S. taxpayers have to say we're going to defend Saudi Arabia, to our second greatest ally in the Middle East or whatever. But, they still weren't able to get that over the hump with Biden. That is what you're saying, right? Like, because the genocide of the Palestinians was active, so live streamed, so egregious, such an obvious international crime met with mass condemnation for most of the rest of the world. Is that almost more helpful in our current moment right now, to have this on the table and being like, okay, he threw down the gauntlet. Ethnic cleansing is the goal of this administration, and then maybe that boxes in MBS and Jordan and all of them?
It's fair to say that there's something particularly nefarious about saying one thing in public and doing the opposite in private. And that's exactly what the Biden administration was doing for 15 and a half months. They said in public, oh, we're pushing for a ceasefire. You recall AOC on the DNC stage. Kamala Harris is doing everything in her power for a ceasefire.
Working tirelessly, yeah.
Working tirelessly, when in fact it was all nonsense. And there's something particularly nefarious and dangerous about that, because we let down our guard. And those of us who actually do want a ceasefire and who are gullible or naive are going to believe that. And we let down our guard and do nothing. Whereas we are seeing in real time the immunity systems kick in of Saudi Arabia, of Jordan, of Egypt, of all of Europe. I mean, when was the last time you heard a German foreign minister get up and say, no, Gaza will not be ethnically cleansed? It is, the immunity systems are kicking in. And so that's very important. It's very important to see someone say what they mean, to say what they plan to do openly, clearly, without any ambiguity, which is exactly what Trump is doing. And so, in fact, that has, I think, real benefits for those of us who care about human rights, who care about bringing an end to the apartheid regime in Israel and bringing an end to the genocidal onslaught on Gaza. Absolutely critical. And you're seeing it now. You're seeing the forces rally. For the first time, honestly, in my entire life, you're seeing the entire Arab world rally around the Palestinian cause. When has that ever happened? Can you recall the last time that happened?
Never, at the very least. I mean, my great fears are about, for example, West Bank annexation. I guess this is a good way to transition to talking about that, because that's Miriam Adelson's desire. That's why she gave Trump that $100 million. She was open about it. I mean, in her speech at that fundraiser in Bedminster, New Jersey, she was saying, oh, I didn't even ask for the Golan Heights, and he gave it to me as a goodie, basically, last time around. It's not being reported very much, but Israel's violence in the West Bank has been escalating as the ceasefire has been tepidly holding in Gaza. What is your analysis of that dynamic?
Well, it's very clear, based on statements made by senior Israeli officials, that as a condition for agreeing to, I would call it a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, that they would be given the green light by the Trump administration to wage an all-out war in the West Bank, especially the northern West Bank, especially Jenin, especially the Jenin refugee camp. But you can expect that this will expand to Tulkarem, to the Nord Shams refugee camp, to Nablus, really pretty much everywhere in the West Bank. We're seeing Israeli military operations like we've never seen before. Really, I mean, I can't recall the last time we saw the kind of operation we've seen. Must have been probably 2002 in Jenin, when the Israeli military entered the Jenin refugee camp, going door to door and slaughtered dozens of Palestinians back in 2002 in that campaign. And we're seeing something similar now with the Israeli military entering the camp, ripping up all the roads. By the way, they did this already in July, so this is nothing fundamentally new. But it's very clear that this is a very targeted, a systematic campaign of rooting out Palestinian militant resistance in the West Bank. And it's having extreme consequences for the civilian population of the West Bank. They've increased the number of checkpoints and roadblocks in the West Bank from about 600 before October 7th. Now I think we're now up to about 900 or 1,000. They've imposed total lockdowns pretty much everywhere in the West Bank. You cannot go from Ramallah to Nablus. You cannot go from Jenin to Tulkarem. There are roadblocks and checkpoints preventing Palestinians from leaving their towns, cities, and refugee camps. We've also seen in recent months the Israeli military now using air power. Now, Hellfire missiles being used in the West Bank. New military tactics, new military strategies. So it's a very, very worrying situation. And look,
can you talk a little bit more about that, Zach? Like that being such an escalation, because people that may not be as familiar with the distinction between like the West Bank and Gaza, Gaza's bombed all the time. The West Bank is bombed occasionally, but it's mostly this rolling violence and seizure of land and vigilantes and IDF people shooting people and killing them in a more targeted way.
The West Bank is divided into three areas. These three areas being Area A, B, and C as a result of the Oslo process. In Area C, which has about 150,000 Palestinians, Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers have been terrorizing Palestinians on a daily basis for decades. And it's been ramping up in the past year. We've seen dozens, I think 24 communities uprooted and ethnically cleansed, primarily from Area C. We're talking more than 1,500 Palestinians ethnically cleansed from Area C in just the past 15 and a half months. Then you have Area B, places like Sebastia in the West Bank, which are now also increasingly coming under threat. We're talking about how many Palestinians in Area B? About 500,000. They're also now facing, these are the sort of semi-rural, small towns of the West Bank. They've been facing increasing attacks by settlers. And now, Area A, the area with the overwhelming majority of the population of the West Bank, the urban centers, Ramallah, Beit Lahem, Nablus, Jenin, Tulkarem, Hebron, Khalid, these areas are now facing a new level of violence, a level of violence that Palestinians in these areas have not seen in decades. These are areas like Jenin and Nablus, where the Israeli military is sending we're talking thousands of Israeli soldiers on the ground, ripping up streets, tearing up civilian infrastructure, destroying the water infrastructure, destroying hundreds of homes, destroying roads, destroying hospitals. In January, just last month, the Israeli military entered a hospital. I believe was it in Jenin, and killed 3 Palestinians. So these are undercover operations taken, carried out by the Israeli military in civilian areas. Dressed up as Palestinian civilians, carrying out the crime of perfidy in international law, which is feigning status as a civilian during armed hostilities in order to kill Palestinians. They're doing it in the West Bank. They've been doing it in Gaza, by the way, as well. Recall that in the Nusayrat refugee camp in this past summer, when when the Israeli military entered that refugee camp to rescue 4 Israeli hostages, they killed 274 Palestinians at the same time. And it was during that operation where they feigned status as both Palestinian civilians and as Palestinian aid workers. And so they're doing that in Gaza, they're doing that in the West Bank as well. It's a very frightening time right now for everyone in the West Bank. not only because they're dramatically expanding the military campaigns in the West Bank, both in the tactics and in the methods and in the strategies in Area A, B, and C, as we already said. But we're also now getting a confirmation that the plan really is annexation. I mean, we've known this all along, but if you follow the reports of B'Tselem and if you follow the reports of Peace Now, every week, every month, the Israeli civilian administration takes another step. And people think annexation is like one day it's not annexed, the next day it is. That's not how it works.
Right.
It's an incremental process. Every week, every month, there's a new policy, a new regulation, which gradually incorporates the West Bank into the Israeli civilian administration.
And it was announced this morning that the Israeli military has been told by higher-ups to begin to plan to remove those remaining Palestinians from Gaza, and what that removal looks like is going to be incredibly violent. Can you react, I guess, to that instruction and give us some historical context about how many times Israel has tried to ethnically cleanse Gaza and they've failed? So, bad record.
Well, first of all, what we hear and what we see from Gaza is that Palestinians have no intent on leaving. Yep. And so any kind of relocation effort is going to be forcible. It's not going to be voluntary. And Israel always blurs the lines between forced relocation and voluntary relocation. They force Palestinians historically, as you pointed out. Israel has attempted to relocate, i.e. ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza on countless occasions. They tried to do it in 1948. It was through American pressure. 1948, it was through American pressure. The American most senior diplomat lived in Israel at the time told the Israeli military, this is the end of the war in late 48, early 1949. No, you're going to withdraw your troops from Gaza Strip and Sinai now. And it was only because of that American pressure in 1948-49 that Gaza wound up in the hands of Egypt rather than Israel. And then in 56, when Israel reinvaded the Gaza Strip, they went on a campaign. They slaughtered 150 Palestinians in Khan Yunis. They slaughtered another 100 in Rafah with the goal to incentivize flight. The same thinking that they adopted in 48 was you slaughter a few hundred here, incentivize the rest to leave. They did the same thing in 56, except 56 was not 48, and the Palestinians did not leave. Only about 1,000 left after those massacres. And then when the Israeli prime minister at the time realized he could not compel Palestinians to leave by force, they started to develop plans to figure out ways of ridding Gaza of its Palestinian refugees. When they reoccupied Gaza in 1967, they did the same thing. They developed a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And this was at the highest levels. The Israeli cabinet met on June 18th and June 19th, 1967. They made a few decisions, one of which was we will annex Gaza after we're able to rid the population of most of its refugees. That was the decision made in June 1967, a week after Israel conquered that territory. And then from the period June 1967 to December 1967, Israel settled on a plan to depopulate the Strip. And basically from January from the end of the war in 1967 until about the end of 1969, 1970, Israel compelled 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza to leave. And then from 1970 to 1972, Israel realized they weren't going to be able to compel more than that by through these incentive programs. And so they did it by force. And Ariel Sharon enters the Gaza Strip in 1971 with a plan to, quote unquote, thin out the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. They enter the refugee. They first entered Jabalia in 1971. They displace hundreds of families. They expel 12,000 Palestinian family members of fighters. So these are innocent civilians by Israel's own admission. They expel them to Sinai. They continue in 1972. They try more attempts in 1974 and 1976. But the whole plan all along, well into the 1990s, is to rid Gaza of its refugees. Anyone who leaves the Gaza Strip or the West Bank for more than 3 years is not able to return. They lose their residency rights. Israel has been on a constant effort over the past 56 years in Gaza and the West Bank to figure out ways of getting them out, of pushing them out, because Zionism is a political philosophy that says, how do we create a Jewish state in a land that's mostly non-Jewish? How do we create Jewish domination and Jewish control in a land that is mostly non-Jewish. Well, the easiest way of doing it is just getting rid of all those non-Jews.
By killing or by forcible transfer. And that is what Zionism is, folks. And I think people are starting to wake up to the contradictions of what liberal Zionism is and what we need to do. Although we still need one, and I was saying this before the show, the evolution in this conversation is an endorsement of a one democratic state from the river to the sea. And we have still yet to see a politician in this country make that case, even the good ones that are standing up for against genocide. That is what our solution, the solution needs to be. Like South Africa, it must be imposed upon them.
One person, one vote to the United States of America is a great idea in the U.S., in South Africa. It's a great idea apparently in every country of the world except for one. There's only one country in the world where the United States apparently believes that one person should not equal one vote, and that's the state of Israel, where you have 3.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank, and you have 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, so you're talking about 5.5 million Palestinians who are apparently not real people. They don't deserve a vote.
They don't get to govern themselves. We get to decide who governs them. I mean, we get to decide who's going to be the governing authority, apparently, of Gaza. That was consistent with Biden and is consistent with Trump. They're too savage to govern themselves. Don't you understand, Zach? So
it's remarkable just seeing President Trump refer to the destruction of Gaza. It's a demolition site in front of the person sitting 1 foot, 2 feet away from the person who made it a demolition site with U.S. weapons.
Yep.
It's just, you're talking about the destruction of Gaza in the abstract, using the passive voice with the person who destroyed it sitting in front of you. It's a level of gaslighting and shameful behavior that I honestly just cannot recall any American president doing that kind of thing really in my lifetime.
Yeah, I guess the rule of thumb is that if there's a new low, Trump's gonna sink to it and create a new standard, within the next few days or something like that. But Zachary Foster, everybody, please check out Palestine Nexus, the newsletter. As you can hear, Zachary has done so much great work in archiving this history that, frankly, through genocide, the Israeli government is trying to erase. So I really appreciate your work, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.